the building of highways can be a contentious issue, especially when they run through communities. In the early years of highway building in North America, there was little opposition. In the US, cars were seen as vital to the holy grail of economic development. As the saying goes, what's good for General Motors is good for America. No point in having lots of cars with no roads to drive them on. In the mid-1950s, this began to change. The flashpoint was New York City, with Robert Moses leading the charge of slum clearance and urban renewal. New highways, new buildings, concrete galore. One woman, Jane Jacobs, made it her mission to stop him. So who was Robert Moses? Not to be confused with who some might call the real Moses, as played here by Charlton Heston in the movie The Ten Commandments. Robert Moses seemed to follow, nonetheless, an 11th commandment of his own, stating, "Thou shalt build highways and crush the communities in their path." As an American public official who became known in New York as the master builder of the mid-20th century, he was also known unaffectionately as Bulldozer Bob. One of Moses' most controversial projects, started in 1948, was the Cross Bronx Expressway, which took 17 years to build and split the Bronx in two, bringing devastating social consequences to communities that were once cohesive and thriving. His bulldozer approach paved the way for the rise of activism in the person of Jane Jacobs, described by Wikipedia as a journalist, author, and theorist, and someone who influenced urban studies, sociology, and economics. Jacob led the resistance in 1955 by mobilizing opposition to a plan to build a highway straight through the center of Washington Square Park for the purpose of connecting Fifth Avenue with a future highway to the south. This was close to home for Jacobs, a place where she had pushed her babies in their strollers and where people of all ages gathered and spent time together. In short, a part of the daily richness of life for many New Yorkers. Moses tried to dismiss her as a housewife, ignorant about urban planning. But she just wouldn't go away. The plan was dropped, and the first of many battles won. This and other projects would have eradicated Soho and much of Greenwich Village, completely changing the history of New York with the loss of a great collection of 19th century buildings today prized and loved by so many. If you'd like to learn more about this story and the ideas of Jane Jacobs, I would highly recommend documentary film Citizen Jane, Battle for the City, and her celebrated book, of course, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. So what's the connection of all this to hospitals? I'm going to suggest to you that hospitals can be seen as microcosms of the city. At the core of Jacob's thinking was the notion that cities should be more about the people inhabiting them than about roads and buildings, which exist to serve the needs of the people and not vice versa. A vital aspect of her approach was that it was necessary and normal for people to congregate, to be together, and that cities need to allow for that. She emphasized that people need to see each other, to have eyes on the street. Something that we tend to lose when we are all in our cars, always on our way to somewhere else. We've learned a lot over the last 50-odd years about cities and the needs of people living in them. Many of these principles apply equally to hospitals. Just as cities are not so much about their roads and buildings, but rather about the people who use them, hospitals are not so much about their buildings and equipment, but about the people who spend their working lives in them, collectively serving patients and families, and often welcoming a great multitude of learners in addition. They are places of convergence, people from all walks of life, coming together around many and varied dramatic events. As such, the hospital is an intensely social place, characterized not so much by its infrastructure as by its culture and sense of community. Simon Sinek is an author and inspirational speaker. In his TED Talk, Why Good Leaders Make You Feel Safe, he explains the value of community as follows. He proposes that people are enabled to do great things in social environments where there are high levels of trust and cooperation. He points out that the challenge in fostering these attributes within organizations is that they are feelings which cannot simply be generated through instructions. He states, I can't simply say to you, trust me and you will. I can't simply instruct two people to cooperate and they will. It's not how it works. He goes on to say that if you go back 50,000 years to the Paleolithic era, what we find is that the world is filled with danger. Many forces working very hard to kill us. The weather, lack of resources, hungry animals who would like to eat us, just to name a few. In response, we evolved into social beings, coming together in what he calls a circle of safety, where we learn to rely upon each other in an atmosphere of trust and cooperation. The modern world brings a more subtle set of dangers, less often physical, more often emotional and psychological. The drive towards safety, however, lives on in our DNA and fuels a relentless quest for that circle of safety. This arguably is the basis of community, which once formed gives rise to something we call culture. So what does culture do? Culture can be seen as the carrier of social code, which perhaps can be best understood by a simple phrase expressing a common understanding that people like us do things like this. Culture influences the range of behaviors within the community. It shapes our institutions, which in turn serve to support the culture from which they arose. It's the key ingredient in the glue holding the community together. Where do we find culture and community in hospitals? They live within the people who work there, in their memories and shared experiences, in their relationships, and in the stories they tell themselves about the place and their role in it, all supported by symbols and ceremonies. Leaders play their role in protecting and perpetuating both the culture and the community. Yet both are fragile, based neither in the ground nor in the walls. They are sustained by passage from one generation to the next. If too many leave in a short period of time, all is at risk. What took years to build may be quickly lost. The restructuring of healthcare in Quebec in 2015 brought with it a systemic indifference to culture and community within our hospitals. This is problematic because the loss of existing culture and sense of community represent a serious threat to the stability of our institutions. Engagement and a sense of belonging go a long way toward encouraging people to want to stick it out when times get tough. When the glue dissolves, the bonds are weakened and broken. The effects of decommunitization of healthcare have been compounded by the creation of an administrative bureaucracy residing and functioning largely outside the institutions, apart from any existing community. It is not involved in sustaining community within the hospital because it is not part of it. There are emails and memos galore, but these do not sustain culture and community. In addition to the community which exists within the hospital, there are two related communities in and around hospitals, all of which overlap. Allow me to demonstrate. The inside of the hospital is here. There's a users group, which is made up of patients and families over here. And there are supporters over here. Now, prior to 2015, management was located here within the hospital. After 2015, management became located outside the hospital and operated primarily with the top-down mode of operation. Local leadership was displaced by a centralized bureaucracy, effectively paving a one-way highway through the community, with predictable effects. Displacement of workers, disruption of relationships, loss of sense of belonging and engagement, loss of trust and cooperation, and ultimately a loss of culture and destruction of this circle of safety. This may be a significant and underestimated contributor to the short staffing of our hospitals today. As part of our efforts to improve healthcare, I believe it is critical, now more than ever, to build and protect a sense of community within our hospitals. Only then will we all flourish once again together. Thank you.